everyone, Sylvie here, part of Happy Courgette Woolworks. I haven't knitted in a very long time, but I thought this might be a useful video for you whilst we're all stuck at home during the coronavirus. What I wanted to do was just to show you how the four basic things really. The cast on is going to be a long tail cast on that I'm going to show you. This is my go-to cast on. It's something that I watched my grandmother do when I was growing up, so this is the one I've just go to whenever I need to cast on a project unless it asks for a different one. And then the second thing I'm going to show you is the most simple stitch that you will need to use all the time, which is the knit stitch. And the other stitch that you will always find that you need to use is called the purl stitch. And finally, the fourth thing I'm going to show you today is just how to cast off. Casting on is just putting stitches onto the needle, and casting off is taking the stitches off of the needle without losing your stitches, because you've closed off each stitch so that when you take them off, it stays the perfect piece of fabric that you've made already. So today I've just got a little tiny ball of waste yarn that I finished a project with a long time ago. It's the Chloe and Spud sweater wool, which is organic cotton, I think. It's quite thick, so it's easy to see, and I thought this would be good for you to see it. The needles I'm using are the Addi interchangeable needles today. I love this kit. It's they're German needles, and basically I have a whole set inside here, and they're interchangeable needles, which means that you have all these different types of cords that you can put all these different sizes of needle tips on top. So these are really fat ones, and today I'm working with some medium-sized ones. So these ones are 5mm ones that I'm working with the cotton with. It really depends on what your tension is, which means how tightly you knit with your yarn or how loosely you knit. So that's why there's always on a pattern it'll say gauge, and when it says gauge, it means once you do a swatch pattern, which is just a tested little tiny fabric square that you make, you measure it out to see if it fits, and if it doesn't, you can decide if you need to go up or down some needle sizes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is that I'm actually going to turn the camera around so that you can see what I'm doing more clearly. And if you have any questions, please comment below, and I'll be very happy to troubleshoot this for you. All right, let's go. Right, now that we're here, what I'm going to show you is how to make a little tiny square that kind of looks like this. So learning the four different techniques to make something that is using the cast on, so that you have to cast on stitches to knit, and then the two different stitches of knit and purl. Just learning those two stitches, you can start to make a pattern that looks like this, which is called the garter stitch. It has ridges, and you can see that there's some V's in the middle. The ridge does come up out of the flat part of the pattern, so you will feel that ridge. And then the other one is called stockinette stitch. This is the one that you'll see most common in any type of sweater that you buy, really. And you'll see all these different V's here. This is the right side of the fabric, so this is what it looks like on the outside. On the wrong side, so the inside of your sweater, it'll look more like this. And in stockinette stitch, it's quite flat again here. But in the garter stitch, you can see that the ridges do pop out a little bit. Here's an easier way to see it. It's something that I knitted a long time ago. You see all these different V's. This is stockinette stitch, so V's on the right side, and on the wrong side you could see that's flat. But again, at the top of here, you can see how different it is compared to this flat fabric. Here is the ridged fabric up here, and that you can pull. It's quite stretchy. This is garter stitch up here, so it's exactly the same as the other one. Alright, so the first thing you need to do is, one, choose your yarn. And to be able to do that, you can choose any yarn that you want, but then you just need to be able to know exactly what you need to be knitting properly with the right needles and everything, so that if your yarn is thinner, you use smaller needles, but it does tell you on the label what you need. So with this ball of wool, I bought this back in Canada, as you can see the $sign here. It's a Rowan brand, and then it also tells you that it's 72% alpaca and 28% cotton. So depending on what fabric you like to work with, If you find natural fibers to be quite itchy, cotton is a good one to go to. Alpaca is soft, but you can be irritated by it. I don't tend to be. But generally speaking, rougher wools, my skin doesn't really like it so much. So just feel to see what you like mostly. Synthetic fabrics or synthetic fibers like acrylic and things like that also won't be irritating as well. Now you can see down here it says it's 50 grams. I don't usually go by grams, but it does tell you how much is in the ball. I like to look at how long, how much length you get in the ball. So it'll give you it in meters and yards, and depending on what pattern that you're looking at, you need to just convert that for yourself to see how many balls you need to finish your project. And then you have, let's look at right here. So SH means the shade. So this color, salmon-y, pinky looking color, is 00407. And the lot just means dye lot. So dye lot is the lot that it's dyed in. So if you are using more than one ball of wool, you just want to make sure that the shade matches and the lot matches so that you don't have any difference in color. Lastly, looking up here, when you are looking at what needle size you need, it does tell you on average that this wool uses a 5mm needle. So in a US knitting needle size, it's a US 8. In UK, it's UK 6. So you just need to make sure that you have the right size to begin with. And if you've never knitted before, just follow this one for now. But once you practice a lot, you'll start to understand if you are a tighter knitter or a looser knitter, meaning that the needle size that you use, do you get the right tension that it's calling for either on this label or on your pattern. So when you are trying to figure out what tension you're knitting at, I generally knit something that's about 15 centimeters by 15 centimeters, so a little square in stockinette stitch that I'll teach you in a little bit. And then I would measure that fabric, so let's just use this for now. And I would measure this fabric against a ruler or on this gritty type of mat that I have that will tell me how many centimeters there are. So then I would count, okay, so does this measure 10 centimeters and how many stitches across do I have and how many rows going up do I have, and does that match what it says on here? So for this wool, it says that if I use 5mm needles, I should get in my little square, I should get 16 stitches across, and that here it says I should be getting 23 rows up as well. So you just need to check into that, but don't worry about that right now. But that's just some information for you. Okay, so what we're gonna do is I'm just going to unravel this so that I can show you how to do this. As you can see, when you're unraveling, it's really easy to lose your stitches, but it's quite simple. And then, all right, perfect. So we're at the end here. Okay, how we start with this is you have the end of your yarn here, and because we're just learning how to cast on right now, just pull about 30 centimeters because I'll be more than long enough to do some practice stitches. Where you're holding at 30 centimeters, just loop it off here and pull it to one side so that you have a loop here. All you have to do, you pinch your thumb and your forefinger together and put them through this little loop, okay? And once you have that, you use these 3 fingers to hold the other 2 strands. This is long tail cast on. This is my preferred way to cast on, and this first step that we do, we only do once. So when you start your long tail cast on, you get 2 stitches. So what you do is you take your needle, pull down from this strand here between your thumb and forefinger. When you pull it down, you create an X here. And when you have this X, what happens is that you stick your needle up, running up your thumb, take your forefinger and wrap it around this needle here, and then you lift your thumb loop up and over, and then you have your 2 stitches. Okay, so the first time that you do this cast on, you always get 2 stitches, so let's do that again. So I'm holding, needle, pulls down, create that X, go up the thumb, around with your forefinger, around this needle, and go up and over with your thumb. Once you have that, you just kind of pull these 2 strands quite lightly and wiggle it so that's tight, but not too tight. Okay, so one last time. have this, pull down, make that X, go up the thumb, around with your forefinger, and thumb loop over top. There's 2 stitches, and then this next step you just keep repeating for however many stitches that you need to cast on. So what you do is, again, pinch your fingers together, feed them through in between the 2, and then you grab onto the 2 strands with your 3 other fingers like before. So you're looking at the back of my hand right now. Think about this, that you don't move anything except your right hand, and you flip it over so that you have an X. So from here, you flip it over to look at your palm, and there's an X here again. So you go up the thumb, around with the forefinger, and thumb loop goes over, and look, you only have 1 stitch here. Flip, you get an X, go up the thumb, around with the forefinger, and thumb loop up. Okay, up, around and over, up, around and over, last one, up, around and over. There. And as we kind of tighten each stitch that we have on here, you want to make sure that you are doing it in the same tension so that it doesn't become tighter in certain stitches or looser in certain stitches, that you want this braid, this edge of your fabric, to be quite even. All right, once you have that, let's see, how many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm gonna do 3 more really quickly. There. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Perfect, let's just use 10 for now. So you can see where we started with this yarn, that there is an end here. Sometimes we have a really long piece here, but this is not the piece that we knit with. So what I like to do to remind myself not to use it is just to do a very light knot, or just to tie it up a little bit so that I don't use this by accident. Okay, so the yarn that you do work with is your working yarn, which is the yarn that's coming from your ball. And that's the only one that you use. Now, there's 2 sides to a fabric, and there's the right side and the wrong side. When we start, generally speaking, it's the right side, unless your pattern says otherwise when people are designing differently. But generally speaking, this first row that we do will be your right side. So all the odd rows would be your right side. So to knit, what you do is you take your needle, you enter from front to back in your first stitch. So from the left side of this first stitch, you go in to the hole, into the back, like this, and then you take your working yarn and you just wrap from behind over to the right. And then you pull this little loop through this first stitch you went into, and you pull it off that back needle, and then you just tighten just a little bit. So that's it, you knitted your first stitch. Technically speaking, since you've been able to do one, you can knit now. So you're just gonna do that for the rest of the stitches on this needle. So I have 10 here, wrap, pull that stitch through, and then up and over, and then here, again, in from the front to the back, wrap around, pull it through, and off. This first row, generally speaking, is tighter than when you get onto your second rows and other rows after this. Knitting from the cast on is, oh, see, look, it's really easy for it to come off, so just be careful and just stick your needles back into these stitches if you've lost them. Sometimes it's easy to also lose those stitches. Say if this one came off and I pulled really hard, you might get a big hole here. It's just easier to start over than to try and repair when you're starting to learn how to knit. So just start over if you lose a stitch and the cast on loses that stitch as well. Okay, so the last one is quite tight. Okay, there we go, first row done. So that's knitting the first row, and you can start to see that there's a V here. And these are the V's that you've created from knitting. Now, if you knit on both sides, you will get that garter stitch that you can see here. Another example is this dishcloth that I made, and you can see all these ridges here. If you knit on both sides, this is the design that you're going to get. This is the easiest one to make. And when I used to teach knitting back in Vancouver, the first project I usually gave my students was a a garter stitch scarf. So you'd have to cast on however many stitches wide you want your scarf to be, and you're just knitting on both sides until your desired length, and then you have your first knitting project done. So again, enter front to back, wrap. It's exactly the same as before. So I'm just doing it a little bit faster so you don't have to watch me the entire time. You can just pause this and keep going. I'm probably going to do 4 rows of this so that you don't need to watch me forever. Okay, there you go. You can start to see these ridges building here. And when you flip back to the right side now, because we just worked the wrong side, you see that ridge just growing right underneath this needle. Okay, let's do 2 more rows of this. You can be knitting on circular needles or just 2 straight needles. It honestly doesn't matter. I generally speaking like the circular needles because when I was knitting with my really long needles that were kind of passed down from my grandmother, I found that I was holding my elbows up and my shoulders up a lot and it started hurting me. So when I'm using circular needles, I keep my elbows more into the sides of my body and I'm mostly using my wrists. So you flip over to the wrong side and you knit again. And when you have circular needles, like I was showing you earlier, you could use different cord lengths. So this blue thing here, you use different cord lengths. And if it's a really small thing that you need to knit in a circle, like a hat, you use a 16-inch cord. If it's a sweater that's not a really large size, a 24-inch cord. The 24-inch cord is generally speaking probably the most popular one. When you're making bigger things, you can use a 32-inch cord, or I think there's a 48 one that I made a blanket out of. So it just depends on what project that you're making. Right now it doesn't really matter because you just have 10 stitches on your needle, but later on, look, this is beautiful. The garter stitch is starting to build and you can start to see these lovely ridges. Yeah, so that's 4 rows of this. You can see it building. And now I'm going to teach you the stockinette stitch. So this one's garter, looking back at the right side. Now for a stockinette stitch, what makes it different is when you look here, that it looks like a V. So on the right side we knit just like before, but on the wrong side we purl. So purling is the new stitch that we need to learn. But since we're on the right side right now, we need to knit 1 more row. So just bear with me and knit 1 more row. Again, front to back, wrap. The more you practice is the faster you can get, but also it's about practicing your tension so that you start to understand how tightly you like to hold your yarn. For me, I'm a loose knitter, so that means to generally speaking get the right tension, I have to go down a needle size to use what they advertise. So like looking at this label, if it asks for 5mm needles, I would go down to a 4.5mm. Just straight away because I know that I like to hold and knit quite loose. Okay, so we've done the first row that is knit. We're going to go and purl now. So before when we were knitting, we were going in to the stitch from front to back. Now we're going to enter from right to left, back to front. So this way instead of this way. Okay, so back to front, we take our working yarn and we wrap it over and behind the needle. Then we pull this loop from behind and we drop off the stitch off the needle. So in, over and behind, oops, God, there you go, through the loop and off. And again. In, around, like this, and off. In, around to the back, behind it, hold, get it through and off. Alright, there we go. So this is purling, the opposite stitch, good. Okay, so we've done row 1 and 2 of stockinette stitch. Knit the first row, purl this second row, and we'll do 2 more. Look, you can see how it looks different. Instead of building a ridge on the second row, we now have 2 V's. 1 V and 2 V's. So we're going to do 2 more rows of this. You can practice by doing 2 different squares, one of garter stitch and then one of the stockinette stitch. And that would be a really good first project just to get yourself going. I used to host these knit nights, these charity knit nights back in Vancouver once a week on a Tuesday. It's really fun. People dropped in and just donated a dollar or two, and basically that would account for shipping costs. I was teaching everybody to make a different stitch every week, and when we did that, they went back home for the week to finish off their squares, and they would bring them back the next week. Okay, so right now, the way that I'm purling is my habitual way, which is kind of strange. You don't really see people doing this. So to go back to the regular way, to wrap, use your right hand so you don't pick up some bad habits. It's like the Sylvie way of knitting, the thing that I just did before, holding the yarn in the left hand. Okay, so purling. I think squares are a great way to practice. The charity that we were donating to, they put these squares that we made into blankets for vulnerable orphans in South Africa, and that was pretty cool. Some other people like to, just make your own squares and make your own blanket, and that's a really nice project to do because you don't feel like you have to finish the whole blanket all in one go, but you just collect the squares that you want to do. Okay, perfect. So we've done 4 rows here, and you can see 4 rows. Because you can see 4 V's. Now, if you look here, you can see 1 V, 2 V, 3 V, 4 V's. So that's 4 rows. Some people find it really, really difficult and quite daunting to know where you've knit to or reading what you've done. So just to get you started, every V is 1 row. You can see 3 really easily here, but there is a 4th one just on top of that ridge. So that's 4 rows. Perfect. So we've cast it on. We've done knitting and purling. So knit on right side, knit on wrong side is garter stitch. Knit on right side, purl on wrong side is stockinette stitch. And now we're just going to learn to cast off. Again, like casting on, there's lots of different ways to cast off. This is the most common way to do it. It doesn't allow for a lot of stretch, but it just gets your stitches off the needle, and it's the one that most people do unless you need a really stretchy one or something that's really special. So this is what you do. You knit 2 stitches, so you enter front to back again. Knit 2 stitches. Once you've knitted them, you have 2 stitches on your right needle. You enter your left stitch into the first stitch that you knitted, and then you just pass it over. Okay, so therefore we've casted off 1 stitch here. You knit the next stitch, so you always have 2 stitches on this side, and then you cast off. Okay. Good. Knit the next one, pass it over. Be careful, your second stitch always tries to slip off. So what I do is I pull this yarn a little bit tighter as I'm passing over. Okay, there. Just a couple more to go. Oh, a few more. 3, 2, home stretch, 1. Perfect. All right, so we're at the end now. And now that we have this 1 stitch that's on our needle, we need to make sure we get the yarn thread through this loop. Otherwise, if I took this out and started pulling, you would see what I did earlier, which is unraveling the entire thing. So what I like to do is just open it up just a little bit, put my finger through and hold it. Because I don't have scissors here with me right now, I'm just going to put my whole ball through here because it's nice and small. And then what you do is it's quite long here, so, okay. And then you just tightly pull and you're done. You've cast it off. You have a piece of fabric. And this is what we just knitted. So now that you have 4 basic skills to do this, try this out and take some pictures of it because I'm looking forward to seeing what yours look like. If you want to just do a full-on square, go ahead and do that. if you want to make something that's about, I would say 12, or maybe 14 centimeters by 14 centimeters is a good square size. So you might need to make a little square like this with a couple more rows just to measure out how wide or how many stitches do I need to make 14 centimeters. So for me, if 10 stitches got me to 6, then another 10 stitches would get me to 12, and then probably 10, 20, I'd say about maybe 23, 24 stitches would get me to 14 centimeters. So that's how you need to figure it out with a ruler. Alright, so I'm looking forward to doing some other videos with different patterns for you. And so give this a shot, and then I'm looking forward to seeing your photos. Alright, I'll see you later.